And a very good morning. Welcome back. You're watching NBS. We're here talking about this breakfast meeting. We're here talking about our oil. You know, every time as Ugandans, since we discovered it, we've been excited. And of course, despite the many other things that have come with it. But you cannot deny the fact that we actually feel good about having such a mineral within our motherland, within the Pearl of Africa. But of course, as we prepare as a country to head into the development phase of its petroleum resources, a lot of debate around the impact, the preparedness of the country, and that is what we'll be unpacking this morning with the gentlemen who are the experts. And of course, the theme is mitigating the social, environmental, and governance impact of oil and gas developments here in Uganda. I'll introduce my guests. Right here on my right is Mr. Twebaze Paul, who is Executive Director for Biodiversity Conservationists in Uganda. And of course, he's also a member of Civil Society Coalition on Oil and Gas here in Uganda. And on my left is Mr. Ronald, you'll teach me how to pronounce your name. I hope I don't pronounce it badly. Agutoko, is that the right way?
Agutoko.
Agutoko, yes. The Environment Officer at the Petroleum Authority of Uganda. Very good morning to you, gentlemen.
Good morning to you, and good morning viewers and online followers.
I just want to start off by breaking the ice, maybe just to pick your mind, and I'll start with you, Mr. Tumwebaze, because for you are the one who's doing everything possible to make sure we do not stray off conserving the environment. How do you feel about our oil? What are your 2 cents? How do you feel?
Of course, the sector generally poses excitement because of the expected revenues. Every Ugandan would want to see benefits from the sector because we have learned from very many other countries. We see the oil producing countries richer with better standards of living, with improved livelihood and better welfare of the citizens. So we also, as Ugandans, excited that when we have our oil out, then we'll be also rich. That's the general perception. So I am personally among those excited to have oil and gas resources here.
Ronald, how do you feel?
Well, it's a very memorable time in the history of our nation. The milestones that have been achieved or that have been undertaken to ensure that we start the commercial production of our oil and gas revenues. As there's a very significant development this week. It's the commencement of the drilling in the Tilenga project. So that means that our 2 flagship upstream projects, that's the Kingfisher project and the Tilenga project, have now commenced drilling. So we have started the process of ensuring that we achieve our first oil in 2025. So there's really quite a lot of excitement.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here first. We are finally officially drilling. But now, of course, this brings in the conversation about the impact socially, environmentally, in terms of governance of this sector. And I'll start with you, Paul.
Yeah, of course, the impacts for fossils or oil and gas resources everywhere are known. Oil, because of its chemical characteristics, can be a potential danger to the environment. And of course, the environment in its complex form here would mean the people themselves as components of the environment because they are living creatures. We'd also talk about the general biodiversity, the plant life, the animals, animal life, of course, all classified into aquatic living organisms and those that live on land. So we usually think that any ventures into the development of oil and gas resources must have or take into consideration the management of the environment for purposes of making sure we do not create problems. We have lived, of course, with these environmental resources, and we depend on them. And so the excitement on oil should not be, can never substitute the values of the environment. So you, of course, you cannot use, for example, oil to breathe. If you contaminated the oxygen that you breathe on a day-to-day basis, then you would die. So it wouldn't make sense for you to have the money and die. So at different levels of the petroleum value chain, there are possible impacts to the environment. Right away from the exploration and appraisal stage to the production, of course, field development and production, and then even in the later stages of decommissioning, we take environmental aspects seriously because there are potential dangers that this oil can cause to the environment if not developed well. So in almost all these stages, we do precautions. We must make sure we put in place the necessary tools. We have to make sure we put in place the preventive measures to make sure oil does not turn into a disaster, but still serves its role and lives in place with the environment at the same time without one compromising the other. So basically, for purposes of outlining the impacts, you know, when you're doing exploration, you use even machinery, you do, our colleagues do a lot of seismology, they use a lot of, they do some even clearance, they do, when they're doing those studies, clearance of vegetation cover, and all these have in one way or another a possibility of disturbing nature. When we talk about development, if you go now to the rift currently and see the rate of infrastructure development, the machines, the vehicles moving, the dust that may rise, all these impact on both the living organisms and even the people. So there could be a potential of even oil spills in an event that we don't take care of how we fix our infrastructure, a possibility of having, let's say, oil spillover like Albert and the whole pattern of the water system, the potential threats to the fish and the aquatic life in an event of oil spills. But also there are social concerns because the oil and gas sector requires land because all this infrastructure is being developed on land. You need land, you have to relocate people, you have to disrupt their livelihood, sometimes even touch on their culture. We have seen very many cases of very many people suddenly being shifted from one place to the other, and they have to start now changing the patterns of life, the means of livelihood. So it's quite a lot. It's quite a lot, and in most instances, we require to think through this in detail and take precautions at every stage so that we minimize the likely danger.
Speak to the governance impact.
Governance is actually very complex, and when you talk about the governance of oil and gas resources, governance in line with environmental aspects, of course, governance is also a tool when you put in place all these other tools, such as of course, starting from the international conventions, you are talking about regulatory and administrative instruments, licensing, strategic environmental assessments, environmental and social impact assessments. All these are market-based protocols, industry-based practices. It's quite comprehensive. But to be able to implement these sustainably, you need the people. And these people come from the institutions. These are the people we are talking about. So there is that, the governance cannot happen without the institutions to do that work. So that's why we have a lot of governance institutions in Uganda mandated with the roles of protecting the environment, where the lead regulator for environment is NEMA, but also we are aware that different agencies have created oil and gas desks for purposes of making sure we manage the sector well. At a higher level, oil and gas can also be a potential danger of governance challenges. We have places where our leaders get excited with oil money, start to borrow in large quantities, and at the end of the day fail to pay because they do resource borrowing backed by they do borrow loans backed by what they envisage.
Yes.
They use the resources as collateral. We have had cases where oil money is used to invest in military hardware and create regime hegemony and overstay in power. Those now are also higher risks of governance if the sector is not governed well. We have, it's on record, we have seen conflicts arising from mismanagement of the oil and gas resources in some countries. So basically, oil is a resource that needs to be governed with caution.
Now, that's how deep the conversation gets, and you start to worry whether, as a country, we've done enough, or we have looked into the nitty-gritty that comes with the oil that we're excited about. Ronald, I want you to come in here. Of course, the debate in different sects of the public about it actually causing development challenges. We wonder if government is doing enough, or it has done enough, even just from his submission, to mitigate the potential impact of the oil development that we're seeing in the country.
Yes, thank you for the question. It's a good one. And I want to begin by saying that, yes, government is doing everything that it can do to make sure that the oil and gas sector is, the resources are developed and exploited sustainably. The government has put in place a robust legal and regulatory framework to govern or to manage the oil and gas sector. There are regulations that have been put in place. I can mention a few, like the National Petroleum Exploration, Development and Production Act. There are different regulations that have been also enacted to operationalize the Act. We have the National Environmental Act of 2019. We have the National Petroleum, the Refining, Conversion, Transmission and Midstream Storage Act. All these are made to make sure that the oil and gas development are done sustainably. And other aspects, including cost monitoring, are well managed. But coming back to the aspect of environment and social impact management, yes, there are also institutions that have been put in place. One of them, of course, is the Petroleum Authority of Uganda, whose mandate is to monitor and regulate the oil and gas sector and make sure that there is lasting value that is created, but also to make sure that Uganda becomes a sound financial investment destination. So in addition to ensuring that these institutions are put in place, the government has also put in place tools to make sure that there's environmental and social monitoring. One of them is the Albert and Graben Environmental Monitoring Plan, which basically entails how the different components of the environment, societal and livelihood aspects are monitored in the oil and gas sector. There is an Albertine Graben Sensitivity Atlas. This was basically created to map out all the key environment and social aspects in the region where we have the oil and gas, such that in the development of the oil and gas resources, the processes are cognizant of these sensitivities, and a lot is put in to make sure that these sensitivities are well protected and not impacted during the activities. The other tool that is very critical is the National Oil Spill Contingency Plan. As we are aware, oil spills can be associated with oil and gas activities.
Very possible.
And they're very, they can cause a lot of significant impact on livelihoods, on the environment, but also the reputational risks and the costs that would be associated if you had an oil spill. So the National Oil Spill Contingency Plan is meant to address some of those aspects and also ensure that there is preparedness and readiness when there's an oil spill. The country and also the oil and gas companies should be able to respond by ensuring that we have the tools, we have the equipment, but also we have the technical know-how on how to deal with an oil spill. But also the other thing that is very important is government has put in place a lot of mechanisms to ensure that the communities, the public is aware of what is happening in the oil and gas sector. We've organized media talk shows like this. We've organized engagements, starting at the community level, going up to the national level, where people who are informed of the industry come and tell the public what's happening in the industry, what opportunities are there, what aspects related to local and national content are being, what interventions are being implemented to ensure that the locals, even at the national level, Ugandan companies are able to participate. So these are all avenues that the government is putting in place to ensure that the process is transparent. But lastly, what's most important is that the government is undertaking monitoring of these oil and gas activities to ensure that there is compliancy with the national regulations, and also to identify areas where there is non-compliancy, where the oil companies are not complying. We should be able to tell them that, look, you're not complying here. You need to improve on this. So that is very, very important, because whereas we might have very good regulations and policies, if their implementation is not being monitored, then there's a gap. So it's government's role through the different institutions like the National Environment Management Authority, the Petroleum Authority of Uganda, the National Forest Authority, Uganda Wildlife Authority, to ensure that these operations are done in line with the regulations.
Ever since we started the journey towards where we are now, you've mentioned sensitive areas. Have we identified any? Has there been any impact? Maybe that is where this talkability is coming from.
Well, the sensitivities, yes, have been identified using tools like the Sensitivity Atlas of the Albertine Graben. As you're aware, Uganda's oil and gas is very unique, based on the fact that it straddles two very important areas. It straddles the Murchison Falls National Park, which is an ecological hotspot. It's a tourism destination, and it's also categorized as Category 4 by the International Union of Conservation of Nature, with endemic species and also endangered species. So that means that whatever the oil and gas operations are undertaking, they have to be cognizant of that fact that we are operating in a very sensitive area, a tourism hotspot. Therefore, the operations have to ensure that there's coexistence between conservation, tourism, communities and livelihood, which is more on the southern side, and oil and gas. So we have to make sure that everything that is being done, these aspects have to coexist if we are to sustainably explore our resources.
Paul,
Yeah.
and that's why you come in here. How have we done so far? You know, because you're a part of civil society. I've had conversations, debates with some of them. Of course, they have expressed their concerns, and government has responded by saying they put mitigation measures. How do you think we have done, especially with the sensitive areas?
Yes, thank you very much. Currently, there are mixed feelings between, of course, different respondents about the subject, especially on the impact of the oil and gas resources to the environment. And when my colleague was talking about raising awareness and sharing information on that particular subject, I feel we still have much to do. Because the reason we have people express opinions that actually may not be factual
That's true.
relates to the absence of the right information. Everyone is excited about oil, but at the same time excited about our environment and ecological resources. Now, there is what we call potential or likely impacts. This is totally different from the actual impacts. In many instances, we have been talking about impacts of the sector. But there is a problem that most people think that some of these potential impacts have already happened. So they start listing the likely or the potential impacts as the impacts of the sector that have already happened. Of course, we know where we are in terms of either case, both the social and then the environment. It's true that on the side of the social, we have had impacts. We have had people relocated. We have had some people compensated. The other time, the implementation of land acquisition programs came up with a lot of excitement. We had people getting so much money which they had never gotten before. Some, of course, getting it with a little financial management literacy. And we have cases, by the way, in Hoima, where people married over 10 women just because they had gotten money. We have cases where people would buy a border, and then a policeman stops him, and then he abandons it and runs, and tomorrow he buys another one. We have people around Kavari where we run for the refinery, buying 5 cars and you park them, but as we talk, none is still moving. So some of those social related aspects have happened. And by the way, even the other side, a lot of speculation. If you go and look at the prices of land around the refinery area, you wouldn't believe around the Kabarega airport. You know, Kabare now changed to,
Of course, the surge.
to Kabarega. So too much speculation, people running down there unexpectedly, a lot of land grabbing. These impacts, of course, have been seen. And we also had a situation of where even the wananchi, or the people were during the time of compensation, where they were even killing animals and burying them to attract some money for relocation of tombs. All that has happened. But that is basically on the social side. Now, for the key aspects of environment, we have been doing work, majorly exploration, and we are now in serious activities of putting in place the enabling infrastructure to support the actual production. So the drilling of the well pads. So, but of course, I would say that there is currently still minimal impact because when you look at the vegetation cover, of course, has been cleared. We have had complaints of pollution, of dust in places where they are constructing the central processing facility, for example, in Urisa. These have happened, but managed. But the challenge is that we usually speak even without evidence. I heard one time someone saying that the ECOP, the crude oil pipeline, is about to destabilize the life of elephants along its route. And I started wondering, where is that in Uganda, in line with ECOP? Because the stretch of where ECOP starts and goes, exits from Uganda, you may not find any habitats for the elephants. The elephants are now the other northern part in the Maction Forest, where we have different activities apart from ECOP. So we have to be sober. For me, from the scientific point of view, we cannot continue communicating on the basis of speculation. And that's why we are always calling our colleagues from the regulators to always involve as many people as possible, such that you minimize the rate at which a few sections misinform others. If you start saying that you have had some of the other social-related talks that the oil has been stored already. People will see containers of waste, that the trucks transporting hazardous waste to a waste treatment plant, and they will say that this truck is carrying oil. Others will tell you that oil is already finished, and we are just playing politics. But I think this comes from the inability of the mandated government institutions to provide as much information as possible. I was in Kisita, in Burisa the other day, and members were saying that before the oil and gas activities, they never used to have long spells of drought. And they are actually attributing the low production for cassava on the oil and gas activities. And not until you go there to clarify, this takes shape and people will continue sharing the same. You have done quite a lot of studies, we know, both geophysical and the geotechnical and the social-related studies, but where are these studies in the public domain? If I start from one of the governance tools of environment, let's talk about the SEA and the EIAs, and then special plans, mitigation plans that have been highlighted to manage the risks on every specific site. These in the public domain. We are still at a time where accessing an SEA report is still a very big challenge. You also know, and these are, the other day we were reviewing the SEA for the, reviewing one for the ECOP to provide comments. It is over how many pages? Some of these documents are 4,000 pages. You need a pickup to carry 2 documents. And you expect the public to read and understand that actually these are the mitigation measures that have been put in place to mitigate any likely danger that will come to us. No. So information is still a challenge. You need to summarize these documents in a way, in a language that can easily be understood by the people. You keep informing them so that they differentiate between these. They also base their arguments on facts. We have the people who are actually neighbors of these facilities, but do not know what is happening inside. And they are free to speculate. What would it take, for example, to organize a trip of the local leaders, even LC1 in the neighboring villages, to enter the facility for once and see? And then all these things we come and tell the people on TV are also known by you know in Urisa how many people can access, for example, a TV set. The other time we used to have people ride bicycles from Wanseko to Urisa town every evening to watch news. I was surprised. I found very many bicycles parked. And what is happening? They said, no, it's news time. It is 7 o'clock. So it is news time. These people have been riding for, they are 3 kilometers from Wanseko. They come and watch news in Urisa town and go back. Of course, the situation has changed now with the improvement in technology, but that tells you the desire for information, the gap for information flow that is still unmet. And as long as we do not deal with that, you'll always have these challenges of miscommunication related to the actual impacts, what has happened, what has not happened. We know that cases where we have had access to visit, we know that some of the activities where we expected impacts have been dealt with in accordance with the plans. We have seen some restoration sites of areas where initial clearance was done, and we find no difference from the original status. There are some credits. But we also say you need to do much. You need to do much, especially making the people themselves in charge, because this resource relates to them. The way you organize these stakeholder engagement meetings must also change. When we are in boardrooms and these important places in Kampala, skies here, we are talking to ourselves. And then the next day here you come and tell us wonders and miracles, and everyone will be like, I think the Ugandan sector needs to be a lead so that the rest of the countries come and benchmark here. Then the next day you hear people demonstrating from the ground. Then you start wondering who is telling the truth and who is a liar in this case. So that information can only be harmonized by you transferring the same information we discuss here on TV to the people. For us, from our docket, we have done that. And actually, that's why you even see some of us have that access to information and have provided support. We clarify in many instances where we can.
Beyond the information gap, are there any other concerns currently that you have with the oil development in the country?
In line with the environment or general?
In general.
Currently, the sector is still in its initial stages. Anyway, midway. And of course, we are now moving to an area which is highly sensitive, and we involve a lot of investment and a lot of finances. When you look at the current concerns that the people have, they may not be my own concerns. Concerns of employment have always come up. I happen to be a member of the MSG for Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative here in Uganda. And when you look at the first EITI report for Uganda and look at the official figures for what the sector is employing, you'll start wondering, because the figures are too low and raises a lot of feelings to Ugandans that they may not benefit from the sector. We still even have expatriates taking over roles where we think we have developed enough capacity for Ugandans to take over. We started the sector here seriously when the commercial viable quantities were discovered in 2006. We embarked on even putting more money, pumping money in our colleagues, the Ronalds, to go and study in the UK, study petroleum, very many deep geosciences, oil and gas, petroleum engineering. But when you look at the current distribution and allocation of the sector, you start looking at where the Ugandans are. You'll find that most of the Ugandans dominate the other lower part of casualty barrels. And we are wondering when we will shift to be able to utilize our experts to be able to take charge as a country if we are still spending a lot of monies on these expatriates. That's one. The other important point is that given the general governance of revenues in Uganda, there are red flags. You know how money has been handled in this country. Today we see in the news, here saga, there saga, here another one, billions lost, this amount of money stolen. So every anxious Ugandan or inquisitive Ugandan would want to see how the sector goes in terms of management of their revenue now that we are about to generate these resources. Is the money safe? That is a question that every Ugandan would be asking. Because then it poses danger or a risk that we may get the money, but this money may not benefit the Ugandans. We know there has been a lot of effort in the review of laws, amending the public finance law, putting in place even the regulations and all this to make sure, all this that we have been having, the decisions and instruments to manage finance. But for me, we still see that as another risk area if we don't open up. First of all, there is less also information about money in the public domain. Up to now, you have never released the serious agreements that you signed with with the companies. No one, very few people have access to some of these agreements, so they don't know their actual benefits, including parliamentarians. The other day we were asking the parliamentarian, and they tell you we don't know. They bring papers, we read, and they are taken back. When you ask for copies of some of these, when we were debating the the East African crude oil bill,
The bill, yes.
the ECOP bill. You know, the ECOP bill is to operationalize quite a number of agreements, some that were previously signed, and some of those previous agreements were not in the public domain, yet we made a law to operationalize what the owners of the resource, the Ugandans, do not know. So some of those things create some little bit of discomfort to the Ugandans, and some start thinking like we may not benefit from the sector. So going forward, these are the things we need to be seeing. We need to see you try to put clarification in terms of sending these messages to the public. What is the problem disclosing the contracts? We know, yes, there is Access to Information Act and the 2005 and the attendant regulations. We know the areas where we have confidentiality clauses in accordance with the law, but the information that is not restricted by the law, let it come out. Disclose.
Maybe let's give him a chance to respond to some of these issues. Ronald,
yes.
He highlights quite a number of things. The employment numbers, which he says are still low, the information gap, which he really expounded more on. Of course, he did give you credit for the restoration in some of the areas. Why are we not open with the arguments? For instance, some of them that, like he's saying, maybe I'm not sure if you're the right person to respond, but here you are.
Yes, let me just start off with the aspect of information sharing, and also make a very pivotal statement that this is a process. It's not an event. We are not going to be at 100% in one day. It's a process. If you look at where the sectors come from since 2006 up to today, there's a lot of achievements that have been gained in the sector. Information sharing has greatly improved to the point that some of these documents have been summarized and even translated in local languages for the benefit of the people at the community level to be able to read these documents in a way that they can understand them and also appreciate some of the information that is being given out there. The quarterly engagements, even monthly engagements, right from the community level up to the district level is being undertaken. And there's even more frequency now. We are engaging these parties almost on a quarterly basis. If there's an activity that is new, that's going to take place, let's say, in a village, we gather that village, we mobilize that village through their local council leader, and we explain to them the activity and what are the potential impacts and what mitigation measures have been put in place, and also what are some of the opportunities in terms of jobs, but also in terms of supplying some of the goods and services. On the issue of the expatriates, I'll tell you right now, it is very, very difficult for an expatriate to get a work permit, because through the national content regulations, there are services that have been ring-fenced for Ugandan companies. And an expatriate will not qualify if that service is one that is ring-fenced. Or a company will not qualify to even bid for that if that is a ring-fenced service. So what I can say is that there's been a lot of progress that has been made. Yes, we are cognizant of there are some shortfalls, and there's a need to actually do more. But we are getting there. And I believe that if right now somebody did an evaluation of how the sector was being run 10 years ago and what is going on right now, there's a very big achievement in that. When it comes to issues of the Public Finance Management Act and the access to information on some of these contracts, yes, as we speak right now, there's a model PSA on the Ministry of Energy website. So that sort of is meant to give people information on some of the non-critical clauses. So people can be able to appreciate what is in that model PSA. Of course, there's information that is confidential, and for you to access it, you have to go through the process of accessing confidential information. But the other information is available on the ministry website, on the PAU website. So the only thing I think we need to do is to tell the public more where this information can be obtained.
Maybe we can speak to some of the best practices, lessons, maybe even failures. You were talking about oil spills. I think Nigeria is one of those that has suffered the same. Maybe we can pick from some of those, even the challenges they have faced, those countries that have had an opportunity, like Uganda is now, to explore this oil journey. Well,
in Uganda, we've adopted a lot of best available technology, based on the fact that there are many jurisdictions that have had oil and gas for very many years. So that has given us an opportunity to go and benchmark in areas in Nigeria, in Norway, in the UK, of some of the best available technologies in oil and gas, and also learn from the issues that they've faced. I'll give you a very good example of the decommissioning fund. Countries like the Norway didn't put in place a decommissioning fund. And now as some of the fields come to the end, they are faced with the challenge of where to get finances to make sure that decommissioning is undertaken. It's going to be very costly. But Uganda adopted a strategy whereby we create decommissioning plans and also a decommissioning fund to make sure that once these facilities have come to the end of their life, they're able to be decommissioned in a safe and environmentally sustainable way. So a lot of benchmarking has been done. The other aspects that we've adopted include the use of the mitigation hierarchy. This is best practice whereby when you're designing your facilities or even when you're positioning them, you follow certain criteria where you first avoid the sensitive areas, you identify your sensitive areas, you avoid them. Where in case you cannot avoid them, you find ways of optimizing to mitigate the impact of your operations on these areas. And where you've impacted on these areas, you offset. You restore and then you offset some of these impacts. So all these are some of the best practices that are being adopted. But also what's very important is that we adopt a concept called the plan, do, check and act, whereby we plan for our operations, we implement our operations, we check to make sure that our operations are compliant. And where they are not, we mitigate or we bring in additional mitigation measures to make sure that we come back to the objectives that we want to meet in the operations.
As we conclude, and I'll start with you, Ronald, where do you think we can do better?
Well, like my colleague had said, we need to improve on the communication and information sharing. I think that's a very important area. People need to know what is happening in the industry at all levels, right from the community up to the national level. So that's an area I think there's room to do more, to provide the information and sensitize people on what's happening and what to expect. It also helps in a way that you're able to manage expectations. I know some of the expectations for the community members are at times unrealistic. Some people look at oil and gas as their cash cow, and that's at times that's not how.
But we can be able to employ almost everyone. Don't you think so?
Well, we can't employ everyone. Yes, the sector is going to employ a significant number of people,
especially
directly and indirectly. But it's not that it is going to employ every Ugandan. No. And I think also there is also merit in ensuring that other sectors also flourish, such that we don't suffer from the Dutch disease. The oil and gas sector can be a very key contributor to the economy, but also other sectors should equally be regulated in a way that they contribute to the welfare of Ugandans, like agriculture. Yes, the sector is looking at some of the interlinkages with other sectors like tourism, agriculture, to make sure that those sectors also benefit or they're uplifted by the oil and gas operations. So for me, it's a very key area that I think we need to provide more information and sensitize more
Oh, well, thank you so much, Ronald. Paul, I see you noting down, but we're also running out of time. What spheres do you think we still need to improve the state of affairs in terms of discussion, in terms of a theme that we're discussing this morning, when it comes to Uganda's oil that we're excited about?
Now, of course, he has mentioned some of the things, but I wanted to point out one important thing that addresses international fear. We are at a time when everyone else is around the globe is saying that fossil fuels are bad, in line with the set targets of the Paris Agreement and the UNFCCC, and then of course Uganda's greening ambitions. So globally, everyone is working towards reducing the environmental footprint in terms of achieving the zero emissions target. And for us in Uganda, we believe that we can only do that by, first of all, using our oil and gas resources to generate the required revenue that we can be able to invest in alternative and greener energy sources. For me, I think that is very, very, very important as we go along, because this oil is here and we are continuing to develop the sector amidst a lot of noise, amidst a lot of global noise. You see demonstrations here and there, and of course the current debate on energy transition. Our plan has been transit from what? Because we are still energy poor to the extent that it becomes very hard to stay even a local woman to stop cutting a tree.
Yes.
Because she has chosen between a child, killing the child because of food, and killing the tree. So in that instance, as long as we are still like that, it becomes very hard to also jump on and say we are going to do an automated energy transition. I see people getting excited with electric cars, and then you're like, wait a minute. We also see government vehicles at the level of even commissioners carrying charcoal. You have had our colleagues in Makshon, so the other part of Nwoya, the chairman are now implementing the laws themselves by arresting the Kenyan truck drivers ferrying charcoal. So we are at a time when things are a little bit complicated, but as we continue to develop the sector, we need to look at how we benefit from this sector as we think of transition. For the people, the wananchi, there is no way the oil and gas sector is going to employ everyone, as he mentioned. For me, most of the monies are in the associated industries. They are even in the other sectors that relate with the oil and gas sector. The influx of the people that is already taking place in the graben requires food. But sometimes this food has to be bought from Kampala and taken to Hoima and taken to Brisa. They need services. But when you happen to go to these places, everyone is waiting for a time when money from oil will be got and then they line up for it. That's outright wrong. Begin to invest in productive ventures so that you are able to supply to the sector indirectly, because when the sector spurs that level of economic growth, you automatically get market for some of the things. One time I was in Hoima, I woke up, I wanted to shave my hair, I was looking for a salon, and it was 10 a.m. and all the salons were still closed. And then the same people are saying this is an oil city. They want to benefit from oil and gas. They are waiting to study to be petroleum engineers when we are actually at the middle of the sector. That means you are preparing for the sector that won't even come. because we would have finished the sector would have ended. So the point should be about preparing to benefit. For me, every time I ask my question, how do I benefit from the sector? I am not going to be an engineering expert starting now, but I can do something. I can do something where I know that money will in one way or another trickle down and reach me.
Well, thank you so much. Twebaze Paul is the Executive Director, Pro-Diversity Conservationists in Uganda, also a member of Civil Society Coalition on Oil and Gas here in Uganda. This morning, we also had an environment officer from the Petroleum Authority of Uganda, Mr. Agutoko Ronald. And of course, the conversation never stops. This is our baby. We're just also learning a lot of things along the way, but of course, there are very many questions. Like I said, a lot of public noise as we develop. Are we asking ourselves the right questions? But that goes without saying. We are excited, but how do we make sure that this does not become a curse instead of a blessing? Victoria Bagaya is my name. I'll leave it here for now. Good morning.